So tonight is our last night on this chapter. So I think I better start with the chapter right away, because I didn't get as far as I wanted to get last night. So let's dig in here. Okay, so we had completed up to verse 39 yesterday, so we'll start with verse 40 now. So remember that we've bowed to the Buddha, we've made offerings to the Buddha of beautiful objects, of a bath, okay? And now we are beginning to open up and confess and reveal our own negativities. So we're contemplating the four opponent powers. Having regret for our negative actions. Then second, having a determination not to do them again. Third, taking refuge and generating bodhicitta in order to restore a good motivation towards whoever it was that we harmed. And fourth, a remedial action. So Shantideva is leading us through this by showing us how he himself practices and thinks. And one of the chief things that is motivating him to do this revelation of faults, this confession, is the remembrance of death and impermanence. That death is definite, but the time of death is indefinite. And when the time of death comes, which it certainly will, our body doesn't come with us, our possessions and money don't come with us, our friends and relatives and status and awards are all left behind. And the only thing that comes with us at the time of death is the karma that we've accumulated and the mental habits that we've developed. And so seeing this, the reality of our own mortality and what it is that really comes with us, then when we look back on our life at what we've spent our time doing, then sometimes we can be so full of regret, because we spent an incredible amount of time, dwelling in a very negative state of mind on the account of people or objects that at the time of death get left behind. But all that karma we created in relationship to them, from being attached to them, from being jealous if other people have more of them than we do, of being resentful and angry if somebody interferes with our happiness. All that kind of karma comes with us. And so thinking about that, we're kind of feeling a sense of horror and a sense of, whoa, I've really set my priorities all wrong in my life, and now I'm seeing it for the first time, and I want to set my priorities correctly, because this life is very precious, and when I get to the time that I'm dying, there's no rerun button to push to go back in time and live my life again. When the time of death is there, we're going. And it doesn't matter how rich you are, how well connected you are, how many doctors are around you, how many family members are there crying, begging you not to die. At that time, there's no choice, because our body is failing, our mind is absorbing and becoming more subtle because the body can't sustain it. And we're going on to the next life with some karma ripening. Okay? And so understanding this now helps us to really think about what is valuable in our lives so that we live every day in a very meaningful way. If we live every day very meaningfully, then when the time of death comes, there's no regret and there's no fear, okay? Because we've practiced well. We haven't created a ton of negative karma. So there's no regret, no fear. And they say that actually, for the very realized and excellent practitioners, dying is like going on a picnic, you know, that they have a very good time dying. Yeah? And I know my own abbot, Khyabche Ling Rinpoche, who gave me my monastic ordination, when he died, he stayed in meditation for 13 days. Yeah, his body was sitting upright. He had left the limbs, but there was still a little bit of heat at the heart area, indicating that his subtle consciousness had not yet left the body. And he stayed like that, meditating on the ultimate nature of reality for 13 days. Okay, I think that was probably better than a picnic, you know, that for him, that kind of meditation is so blissful, and feeling so much happiness by being able to make his life meaningful and feeling no fear whatsoever because there's no negative karma hanging around to ripen. Then, you know, death is totally okay and even enjoyable. So it's for this purpose that Shantideva is giving us all this advice, so that we can die in a very good way, have a good birth, so that we're able to continue practicing the Dharma in future lives, and then keep on purifying our mind, accumulating positive potential, studying the Dharma, practicing, so that we can really progress along the path as we go. Okay, so let's keep in mind why we're talking about death, okay? Because some people think, oh, when we talk about death, it's so morbid. You know, don't talk about it because then it might happen. Yeah, as if you don't talk about death, then it might not happen. Is that true? That if you don't talk about it, it won't happen? No. Okay, death is going to happen whether we talk about it or not. So we might as well talk about it so we are prepared for when it happens. Okay, because it's not like, you know, death gets planned and everything's all laid out. Okay, we don't have a ready-made script for dying that we have, you know, we have rehearsed the whole time. Yeah, for advanced practitioners, yes, they've done that. There's a whole meditation they know how to do at the time of death. And they just do the meditation and have control over their death process. But for the rest of us, you know, death can come at any moment. And we can't say, excuse me, but I'm really busy today. Could I die next week instead? You know, we can't do that. It's there. We have to deal with it. Okay, so we'll continue on as Shantideva is giving us advice and sharing with us how he thinks. Although lying here on a bed and relying on relatives, I alone have to bear the feeling of being cut off from my vitality. Okay, so there you are, lying on the bed. You're relying on your relatives to feed you or, you know, be nearby. However, no matter how many other people are there in the room, we die alone. and we go through all the experience and the sensations of dying alone. Nobody else, even if somebody else in the room is dying, they're not sharing our experience. They're having their own experience. Okay? For a person seized by the messengers of death, what good is a relative and what good is a friend? At that time, merit alone is my protection, and I have not applied myself to it. Okay, so at the time of death, what good is it having friends and relatives? You know, what can they do for you? They can't take away your fear, your misery when you're dying. In fact, sometimes having friends and relatives around when we're dying makes it more difficult. Yeah? I mean, can you imagine? They're the people that you care about, and they're all crying hysterically, and you know, you're trying to die and take refuge and meditate on emptiness, and the people you care about are like crying? Is that going to be nice? Yeah? The friends and relatives are just going to be a big disturbance. You're going to want to say, hey, look, go out of the room. If you're going to cry, go somewhere else. Okay? Actually, many years ago, I was helping one young Singaporean man who had cancer, who was dying. And we kind of talked about his death. Of course, things didn't turn out exactly as we had talked about. But he told his sister, who was taking care of him, that if she got upset while he was dying, please leave the room. Yeah? And she was very respectful of that. Yeah? So if you're ever with somebody who's dying, you know, pay attention to them and try and help them. Don't just sit around and get emotionally upset, because it doesn't help anybody in the situation. And if you feel like you can't control at that moment, then leave the room and process your emotions somewhere else, letting the environment in the room of the dying person be peaceful. Okay? So Shantideva is saying, you know, friends and relatives aren't useful at the time of death. What is useful is our merit and our positive potential. But while we had the time to create it, we were busy doing other things. Okay? I've always thought that we could write a book called The 4,957,549,113 excuses why I can't practice the Dharma. Yeah? Maybe somebody has a few more I can add in case I didn't get them all. But, you know, we have so many reasons why we can't purify our negative karma, why we don't have time to create virtue. Now, so many excuses, like I have to eat breakfast, yeah, or I have to water the plants, or I have to clean the house, yeah, or I have to go in and work overtime. Okay? And we have so many excuses, and yet at the time of death, all of those are worth nothing, because if we didn't create positive potential, we just don't have it to take with us at the time of death. Yeah? So it's important to do our practice now while we have the opportunity and the chance to make that a priority in our life, and not to let all these very silly, mundane things distract us. Because what usually is distracting us are the 8 worldly concerns. We talked about those yesterday. Remember, attachment to pleasant sensual sensations and aversion to unpleasant one, attachment to approval and praise and aversion to criticism and blame, attachment to having a good reputation and a good image, an aversion to having a bad one. Now, attachment to our money and possessions, aversion to losing them. Okay? So all those 8 concerns that are just centered around the happiness of this life and very focused on me, okay, me, the center of the universe, when we spend our time chasing those 8 worldly concerns, at the end of the day, we don't have anything to show at all. Okay? Because all those 8 stay here, and meanwhile, we're going on to the next life. Okay. O protectors, I, negligent and unaware of this danger, have acquired many vices out of attachment to this transient life. So that's just what we were saying. Okay, unaware of our own mortality, unaware of the fact that death can happen at any time, out of attachment to this very transient life that goes by so quickly, we've created a great stock of negative karma. One completely languishes while being led today to have the limbs of one's body amputated. Parched with thirst and with pitiable eyes, one sees the world differently. How much more is one overpowered by the horrifying appearances of the messengers of death, as one is consumed by the fever of terror and smeared with a mass of excrement. With distressed glances I seek protection in the 4 directions. Which good person will be my protector from this great fear? Seeing the 4 directions devoid of protection, I return to confusion. What shall I do in that state of great fear? Okay. So if we think of, let's say, somebody who has been very injured and they have to have all 4 limbs amputated, you know, that person's going to be terrified, especially if they have to have that surgery without any kind of anesthetic. So they're going to be parched with thirst, with very pitiful eyes, and, you know, terrorized by that. So if you think, and that's just having your arms and legs cut off. So if that's terrifying, then think of what's going to happen at the time of death when we're leaving everything behind, not just our arms and legs, but our whole body we're leaving behind, and where we're leaving even our whole ego identity behind. Okay? So this whole concept that we have of who we are, I am this person, so therefore such and such is going to happen, and this and that can be expected. All this, all these images we have of ourselves, yeah, based on how we fit into a certain environment. At the time of death, the environment and all these images are evaporating, okay? Because we don't take our body with us to the next life. We don't take our social standing. We don't take our flat with us. We're going on without any of the things that usually give us an identity, okay? So imagine how frightening this is going to be at the time of death if we haven't practiced, okay? When we have to give up everything, including our identity. And there we are searching around for help, looking in the 4 directions, yeah, looking everywhere, looking for somebody who can help us. But there's no, friend or relative who can take this misery away from us. Why? Because when we had the time to do the practice that would prevent this misery, we were too busy chasing pleasure. We were too busy retaliating against our enemies. Okay? So at that very last moment, there's nothing there that can help. Okay? As much as we're crying out for help, what can a friend and relative do? Okay? At the most, they might remind us of our spiritual mentor. They can tell us to take refuge. They can guide us on a purification meditation, or on the taking and giving meditation, or on a meditation on emptiness. They can ask us to remember those things. But if during our life we haven't had any familiarity with those practices, even though our friends and relatives may remind us at the time of death, we're not going to remember how to do the practices. Okay? So while we're alive, people give us all sorts of advice to listen to Dharma teachings and practice. But we ignore the advice, and then at the time of death, we go, what's going to happen? Okay? So if that happens, that's because of our own ignorance, not taking the wise advice that we've received. Okay? I remember one time there was one young man who was dying of cancer, and he asked me for a meditation practice to do. So I contacted my teacher, who was able to prescribe a very specific practice for him to do. And when I called him up and I said, come over and I'll teach you this meditation practice, and this could be very effective in curing your illness, he said to me, oh, well, I'm back at work and I feel better and I don't have any time now. And here was I knew, if you have a cancerous brain tumor, you need to do some serious practice. Otherwise, there's not going to be a good prognosis. And here I was having the tools to help him. And he told me he didn't have time. And I knew that after some time, he would get worse and he might even die. And at that time, he'll come to me for help. But what can I do at that time? And in fact, that's what happened. Several months later, the tumor flared up. He had to stop working. He died. And at that time, I was there. I was helping him as best as I could. But the time when I really could have helped him, he was too busy. Okay? So similar, we may not have a brain tumor now, but we are all in the process of dying. Because as soon as we're conceived in our mother's womb, aging and death begins to approach. Okay? It's not like we're living and then something called aging happens accidentally and death comes as a surprise. Okay? But from the very moment that we're conceived in our mother's womb, after that it's all aging and it's all headed towards death, and there's no way to avoid it. Okay? So don't think that because you're healthy, that this advice doesn't pertain to you. Because remember the verse we read yesterday that said that death doesn't wait for tasks done or tasks undone? It just comes when it will. Okay? So, we're looking in all the directions, not finding any protection, then becoming confused. And Shantideva is saying, what shall I do in that state of great fear? Because having wasted one's precious human life, not having practiced, not having purified, and instead having created a lot of negative karma, what do I do now? Death is approaching. What do I do? There's no quick fix. There's no pill to take at that moment that purifies our negative karma. Okay? So at this point, now his mind is beginning to change. And so he says, right now, okay, so seeing that there's nothing that friends and relatives can do to help me, therefore, right now, I go for refuge to the protectors of the world, in other words, to the Buddhas, whose power is great, to the jinas, to the conquerors, those who have conquered the defilements, who strive to protect the world and who eliminate every fear. Okay? So how does the Buddha eliminate fear? Okay? Does the Buddha eliminate fear by getting rid of all the things that we're afraid of? No. Okay? Getting rid of fear does not mean separating from all the things that we're afraid of, because that's impossible. Where are you going to go where you're going to be completely free of everything you're afraid of? Rather, becoming fearless means transforming our own heart, transforming our own mind. If our heart and mind are transformed, then no matter what circumstance we're in, we're not going to be afraid. Okay, so how does the Buddha protect us and stop our fear? By teaching us the Dharma, so that we know how to control our own mind, so that we know how to work with our moods and our thoughts. Okay, if we know how to do that and practice doing that and are well trained in doing that, then we're not going to have any fears. Okay, because then if anger comes up, we know to meditate on patience. If attachment comes up, we know to meditate on impermanence. If jealousy arises, we know it's time to meditate on rejoicing. Okay, so we know what to do, we're familiar with it. So then there won't be any fear. Okay, verse 48. Likewise, I earnestly go for refuge to the Dharma that is mastered by them and that annihilates the fear of the cycle of existence, and to the assembly of Bodhisattvas as well. So verse 47 is taking refuge in the Buddha. Verse 48 is taking refuge in the Dharma and in the Sangha. Here the Sangha is the Bodhisattva Sangha. Trembling with fear, I offer myself to Samantabhadra, and of my own will I offer myself to Manjughosha. Okay, so seeing that the time of death is there, there's nothing to hold on to from this life, then completely offering oneself to these high bodhisattvas. And by offering ourselves, what we're saying is, I offer myself, to do what will please you. What is it that will please the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas? Our Dharma practice. Okay? Terrified, I utter a mournful cry to the protector Avalokita, that's Kuan Yin, whose conduct overflows with compassion, that he may protect me, someone who has done wrong. Seeking protection, I earnestly invoke the noble Akashagarbha, Kashidagarbha, and all the compassionate ones. I vow to Vajri, in other words Vajrapani, upon the sight of whom the messengers of death and other malevolent beings flee in terror to the four directions. After neglecting your counsel, in terror I go to you for refuge. Now as I face this fear, swiftly remove my fear. Okay, so he's saying, after spending years of my life not paying any attention to the advice of the Buddha, now when I'm afraid, I'm going to you for refuge. So please, as much as you can, help me. Okay? Sometimes we do this a lot, people offer us very good and wise advice and we totally ignore it. Yeah? We just totally kind of shine it on. And then when we get in a difficult space, then we run to people for help. So, for example, when you come to Buddha's teachings, like this teaching, Shantideva is saying, look, you're going to die, and you don't know when death is. And at the time of death, your merit and your practice is what's important to you. So Shantideva and the Buddha are giving us incredibly wise advice. But we somehow feel like the advice is a little bit too extreme. What are you talking about? I'm young. I'm not going to die for a while. And if I get sick, I have control when I'm going to die because I can just go to the doctor and the doctor will cure me. Okay, we have all these advancements in medicine, medical science. They should be able to keep me alive. So why are you doing this big trip about encouraging me to practice the Dharma? I mean, why can't I go out and have a good time? This is the way we think, right? Okay, we totally ignore the advice of the Buddha. However, if we go to a fortune teller, and the fortune teller says, oh, you're going to get sick this year. We're terrified. Oh no, I'm going to get sick. I better go practice the Dharma. I better do some purification. Quick, what do I do? Okay, so look at it. Look how foolish we are. Here's the Buddha, somebody who's omniscient, whose mind knows things as they are. The Buddha gives us advice, and we say, what does this guy know anyway? A fortune teller who doesn't have spiritual realizations, okay, tells us we're going to go sick, and we're like, I believe you. I'll do anything you say. Yeah? Isn't that pretty stupid on our part? Isn't that really stupid, don't you think? Yeah? Why don't we listen to the Buddha, but we do listen to the fortune teller? I have an idea about why that happens. I'll tell you. And I'll tell you a story of how I learned this, because one time in Spokane, that's the major city near the Abbey, they were having some kind of New Age fair or something. Anyway, they offered us a free booth. So I came with a few other Dharma practitioners, and we had some Dharma books there, and we sat out and we were, ready to talk with people about the Buddha's teachings. On the booths to my right and my left, both of them had fortune tellers and psychics. Okay? Now, whether people who claim to be psychic are really psychic, I have no idea. Okay? And even if they are psychic, whether their psychic powers are accurate, I don't know. But anyway, there I was, sandwiched between two psychics. So people, kind of, we have the Buddhist books out in front. They kind of, walk by, look, keep walking, okay? But the people who went to the psychics, yeah, and mind you, with the Buddhist books, we don't charge anything. At the Abbey, we don't charge for anything. We live completely on donations. So there we were, ready to give books out. We weren't charging anything. People didn't come. The psychics on either side, they were charging, I don't know how much, but quite a bit, okay? To give you a half an hour consultation or a 20-minute consultation, charging quite a bit of money. And I watched the people who went to the psychics, and they would sit there and look at the fortune teller like this. Totally single-pointed concentration. Yeah, no distraction. They weren't looking around, looking at the time, just looking at the fortune teller, totally engrossed. And you know why? Because the fortune teller was talking about them personally. Okay? Somebody talks about me. Well, this person must be smart. They finally realized that I'm the center of the universe. at least somebody realizes how important I am, and they're talking just about me, and I am so fascinated by it. You know? And I watched this, and people would pay who knows how much money for that, because it was all about me. And they had such trust in the fortune teller, who's a worldly person. The Buddha, who's freely giving advice and teachings simply, out of compassion, he's not talking specifically to me, about me. Not very interesting at all. Okay? Is this the way we are? Yep. Yep. Is it any surprise we're in cyclic existence? Nope. With that kind of attitude, what kind of karma are we creating? Yeah, we're not creating the karma to be liberated from cyclic existence. Yeah. Anyway, good thing there are no psychics on this side or this side. Otherwise, I'd be talking to an empty hall. You'd all be waiting in line to see the psychics. Joking. Maybe not joking. Okay. Even one frightened by a fleeting illness would not disregard the physician's advice. How much more so one afflicted by the 404 diseases, of which just one can annihilate all people living in Jambudvipa, and for which a medicine is not found in any region. Okay? So if even somebody who has a cold or a flu, you follow the doctor's advice, yeah, then what about somebody who is suffering from the great disease of ignorance? Yeah? Ignorance, which is the source of all of our physical diseases, all of our mental problems, okay? And there's no medicine that a doctor can give us, no magic pill that cures ignorance. Then shouldn't we, really follow, if we have a spiritual guide's advice about what to do, shouldn't we follow that? Okay? If we follow a doctor about something, about a cold or a flu that's certainly not going to kill us, then shouldn't we follow the guidance of the Buddha, who's the supreme physician, who will show us how to cure the disease of ignorance? If I disregard the counsel of the omniscient physician, this is referring to the Buddha, who removes every pain, shame on me, extremely deluded one that I am. So Shantideva is saying, if I have the opportunity to learn teachings from the Buddha, and these teachings can eliminate all pain from all of my lives forever, and instead, if I disregard that advice, then really, I'm very, very foolish. He says, shame on me. Aren't I deluded? If I stand very attentive, even on a smaller cliff, then how much more so on an enduring chasm of 1,000 leagues? Okay. So, for example, if you're standing on a small cliff, you're very vigilant, aren't you? Yeah? You watch everything you're doing. You're not reckless. So if you're that kind of vigilant when it's just a small cliff, then if it's a huge cliff with a really huge fall down, wouldn't you be even more vigilant? Yeah? So, a small cliff, it could be even from the edge of the stage. We're careful when we get to the edge of the stage so we don't fall down and, hit our knee. If we're careful about that, then what about standing on the cliff of death, ready to fall into the lower rebirths? Shouldn't we be very vigilant at that moment? Shouldn't we take great care? Shouldn't we follow any advice that would help us and prevent us from falling into that chasm of the lower realms? Now, certainly we should really listen to the Buddha's advice. It is inappropriate for me to be at ease thinking, just today death will not arrive. The time when I will not exist is inevitable. Okay. So, we always feel that. We wake up in the morning and we think, death's not going to happen today. Yeah? In fact, we never even bother to think death won't happen today. We just assume it won't. Okay? But do we know that? No. No. And in fact, everybody, if you think in Singapore, since morning time today, there's been a lot of people who have died today, right? There's a lot of hospitals in Singapore. There's been people who have died today. All those people who have died today, when they woke up in the morning, they probably didn't think that they would die today. Even the people who are very sick with a terminal illness always feel, later, death will come later. I still have a little bit more time. Okay? But see, this is our foolishness. Whereas if we woke up in the morning and we thought today could be the last day of my life, then we would be so vigilant. We would make really good decisions. We wouldn't be flippant and trivial. Okay, we wouldn't get involved with negative thoughts, because who wants to get involved with negative thoughts on the day you're dying? Yeah, we wouldn't get involved with craving things and being obsessed with things, and this mind that's sticky with attachment, because on the day we die, who wants to cultivate attachment? That doesn't help. Okay? So this mindfulness of our own mortality is very, very good for helping us to remain in a positive mental state. And I know this myself. When some years ago I was studying with one of my teachers, Geshe Nawang Dargye, and we were studying Aryadeva's text, the 400, and it has a whole chapter just about impermanence and death. So Geshe-la, for quite a number of days or weeks, every day he would teach some verses about impermanence and death. And so every evening I would go home and review what he taught and meditate on it, so the awareness of impermanence and death was really strong in my mind at that time. And as a result, my mind became very peaceful. Yeah? Doing some confession, apologizing to people who we've harmed, forgiving people who harmed us, generating love and compassion, developing wisdom. Okay? There's so many useful and meaningful things we can do. So when we have an awareness of death, then meaningful things. And so as a result, it gets very peaceful, very calm. Okay? Who can give fearlessness? How shall I escape? I shall certainly not exist. Why is my mind at ease? Okay, so he's saying, death is definite. How do I stop being afraid? How can I escape from this fear? Because at the time of death, my present ego identity is finished. The continuity of our mind stream goes on. But this whole conception we have of ourselves, I am so, this is my name, these are my relatives, these are my jobs, this is where I live, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, how people should treat me. All these ego identities that we have at the time of death finish on. Okay? So that's what he means. He says, I certainly not exist. He doesn't mean continuity of consciousness stops. What he means is the whole ego that's attached to this life completely evaporates. So seeing that, and seeing that we're totally unprepared for that probably at the time of death, we're going to have a lot of craving for our life and a lot of grasping at our next rebirth once we realize that we can no longer, stay with this one. And those two mental factors of craving and grasping, that's what causes karma to ripen. So when you study the 12 links of dependent origination, which talks about how we cycle in samsara, in cyclic existence, two mental factors of craving at the time of death that doesn't want to separate from this body, doesn't want to separate from this ego identity, and then grasping, which then grasps at the next birth once we realize we can no longer stay with this one. Two are the chief things that make karma ripen. Okay? And so especially if we have a lot of regret and our mind is overwhelmed by fear, likely that there's going to be a good karma that ripens at that moment. Yeah? If we're able to take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, if we're able to think of their virtuous qualities, think of love and compassion, or meditate on emptiness, if we're able to do that at the time of death because our mind is in a virtuous state, then it's going to be so much easier for positive karma to ripen, and that will propel us into another rebirth. Of course, we want to stop the whole cycle of rebirth, but if we're not at a point where we can do that, then at least let's get a good rebirth so we're able to continue doing our Dharma practice in the future. Okay? Because if we get a bad rebirth, very difficult to practice Dharma. Yeah, I have 2 cats at home. Yeah, my cats have heard so many Dharma teachings. Yeah, because at the beginning, we, at the Abbey, for example, when we moved in the house, we did a meditation hall. So all the teachings were in the living room. So the cats came for the Dharma teachings. Yeah, so they've heard so many times about the precepts, and about creating negative karma. They've heard so much advice about not. But when they go outside and they see a little mouse or a vole or a chipmunk, whoo, there they go. Okay? So no matter how much I explain to them, you shouldn't kill because other living beings want to stay alive just like you do, they find it very difficult to practice the Dharma. Okay? So if we have rebirth, that kind of rebirth, how are we going to practice the Dharma? Okay? I mean, cats, they have a very fortunate rebirth. They're well-fed, they're very cool. They even hear Dharma teachings. Okay, quite fortunate, but very difficult to practice and with the level of intelligence of an animal. So we don't wind up with that kind of rebirth. Mm-hmm. What of value remained with me from earlier experiences which have disappeared, and engrossed in which I neglected the counsel of spiritual mentors? Okay, so we've had so many past experiences. They're all gone now. Yeah, they're just like last night's dream. They're just memories. When I was involved in them, when I was engrossed in them, I totally forgot all the wise advice my Dharma teacher gave me. Yeah? Does that ever happen to you? Yeah? Your mind gets completely overwhelmed by ignorance or by desire or by anger, resentment. You know, when the mind is feeling some negative emotion very strongly, do we remember the Buddha's advice? Yeah? When there's some object that you really want to get, do you ever think about the disadvantages of attachment? No. Yeah. When there's something we really want, all we can see is how wonderful that is, how much I want it, how much I need it, I've got to have it, I can't live without it. You know, Buddha's teachings out the window. Even a Dharma friend comes and says, you know, look, I'm having some problem with attachment. We go, I'm not attached. I need this. Yeah, we don't understand. Okay? Or how experiences when we were very, very angry and our mind was overwhelmed by anger. Do we remember the Buddha's advice to practice patience then? Yeah? Do we remember? We're just focused on that person did this. How dare they? I can't believe it. Oh, this idiot. You know, sitting there telling ourselves the same story again and again about how awful this person was. You know, it doesn't matter that we've listened to teaching, Dharma teaching for years. At that moment, gone. You know, all I can think of is how angry we are and how we really wish that person gets suffering. You know, after what they did to me. No, that's all we can think of. Yeah, so that's what Shiva is saying in this verse. You know, we were completely engrossed in these situations. We neglected the advice of our spiritual teachers. Okay, but what of value has remained from those situations? What do we have to show from them? Okay, even we got revenge on our enemy, so what? Even we got our object of attachment, so what? None of those things are here now. All we have is the negative karma. Okay, upon forsaking my relatives and friends and this world of the living, alone I shall go elsewhere. What is the use of my friends and enemies? In other words, why do I spend so much energy being attached to my friends and harming my enemies if none of that has lasting value or meaning? Why? What's the purpose? Okay. In that case, only this concern is appropriate for me day and night. How shall I surely escape suffering on account of that non-virtue? So he's saying the most important thing we should think about day and night is how we purify this negative karma so that it doesn't ripen and bring the suffering result that will definitely come if the karma is not purified. Okay, whatever vice, whatever natural misdeed, and whatever misdeed by prohibition I, an ignorant fool, have accumulated, terrified of suffering, all this I confess, standing with folded hands in the presence of the protectors and bowing repeatedly. May the guides be aware of my transgressions together with my iniquity. O protectors, may I not commit this evil again. Okay, so what Shantideva is saying is whatever negativities we have created, okay, And there's different kinds of negativities. Some are called natural, he translated here, natural misdeeds. So these are naturally negative actions, which means that just about any being who does them is doing them with a harmful motivation and will thus accumulate negative karma. So these are the 10 unwholesome actions: killing, stealing, unwise sexual behavior, lying, creating disharmony, harsh words, idle talk, then coveting, ill will, and wrong views. Okay, those are all naturally negative actions. So confessing all of these, because any time an ordinary being does them, you know, they lead to harm almost any time, okay? And so that's one type of negativities. And then another type is whatever misdeed by prohibition, okay? So these are negativities we've accumulated that are not because the action is naturally negative, but because the Buddha made a precept against doing this. We've ignored the precept, okay? So for example, like drinking alcohol, it's not a naturally negative action, but because the Buddha prohibited it, because he saw that it leads to a lot of problems, then if we drink the alcohol, yeah, we're breaking that advice, that precept of the Buddha. And so that's misdeed through prohibition. Yeah, so you understand the difference between these two kinds of things? And so Shantideva is saying, all misdeeds that I, an ignorant fool, have accumulated, okay, not wanting to suffer, either at the time of death or in my future life, I confess all of this. I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to rationalize it. I'm not going to justify it. I'm not going to blame others. I'm not going to make excuses. I'm owning these are faults that I committed, okay? And you know, whenever we can own our own faults and have a deep sense of regret, then our mind is liberated by all the feelings, from all the feelings of remorse and guilt, okay? There's a tremendous feeling of relief that comes when we're able to completely own our negative actions and stop blaming others for them, okay? But as long as we're like rationalizing, justifying, defending ourselves, saying somebody else made me do it, or it's somebody else's fault, or blah, 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 then our mind's not going to be at peace, because we know deep down what the truth of the situation is. So the more we lie to ourselves, the more we're harming ourselves. Whereas the more we can just own that these were negativities that I did, and we have genuine regret and a determination not to do it again, we're able to really put those negativities down. Then our mind becomes really peaceful, because we're no longer afflicted by guilt and remorse. Okay, so this is what Shantideva is advising us to do. So he's saying, all this I confess, standing with folded hands, so with our palms together, in the presence of the protected Buddhas, and bowing repeatedly. So we're not just standing whimpering, we're bowing, you know, and when you bow, you're putting your body in motion, and it has a very visceral effect. Yeah, in the Tibetan tradition, when we do prostrations that accompany confession, we do full-length prostrations where your whole body is on the floor, okay, and your nose is there in the dirt, yeah, and it's so good for the mind, you know, because you really let go. All my pride, all my conceit, all my defensiveness, out the window. Okay? So somehow the thing of doing the prostrations and bowing to the Buddha, that physical motion helps us to really feel in the depth of our heart the confession that we're making. And so we're requesting, may the guides, in other words, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, be aware of my transgressions together with my iniquity. O protectors, may I not commit this evil again. Okay? And so we're asking the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to be witness to our confession and to have some compassion on us. And we are in their presence making a very strong determination to avoid those kind of harmful actions again. Okay? So all of this is very psychologically healing and spiritually purifying. It's really quite a wonderful process. Okay, so that's chapter 2. Yeah. So we have some time remaining for questions. Yeah, I can start with some of the questions that were left over from last night, and then you can also write some ones if you wish. Okay, so somebody's saying Mahayana tradition, Theravada tradition, Vajrayana tradition, all these traditions are Buddhism. What are their differences? You know, whenever I'm asked questions like that, I like to say instead, what are their similarities? Okay, because rather than looking at the differences, I think it's much more helpful for us to be aware of common points between the various Buddhist traditions so that we respect the traditions and respect the practitioners of all the various traditions. So it's important for us to know that all of these Buddhist traditions are based on the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path. Yeah, they all talk about rebirth and the importance of purifying and accumulating positive potential. They all talk about developing love and compassion, forgiveness, kindness. They all talk about understanding selflessness and letting go of clinging to a false notion of the self. So all these traditions share the same basic principles. Yeah, there are slightly different ways of meditation. Sometimes there's philosophical differences, but those are much too extensive to go into in a short answer like this. As I said, I think it's important that we see that all these teachings come from the Buddha. Also, it's important to know that Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana are not three different kinds of Buddhism. Okay? That, for example, somebody who practices Mahayana must also practice the Theravada teachings. Somebody who practices Vajrayana must also practice the Mahayana and the Theravada teachings. So don't think that these practices are all separate, but actually, you know, they include one another. Did you have some new questions? I'm going to get the one tonight. Okay, so what is the proper ritual when death occurs in the Tibetan tradition? You know, it's not so much about ritual, it's about how you practice. And I say this because sometimes people can get very involved in ritual and do a ritual for the sake of a ritual, but not use the ritual to change their mind. Okay? The purpose of any ritual is to change our mind. We do not do rituals for the sake of ritual's sake. Yeah? That's not meaningful at all. So I'd like to reword this, and instead, what is the proper ritual? What is the proper way to think when somebody is dying? Okay? What is beneficial to do when somebody's dying? Okay? So, let's start off with, if we're helping somebody else, somebody is dying and we happen to be with them. Okay? Then, like I was saying before, don't be crying in the room and make a big fuss. Try and help that person beforehand to settle all of their worldly issues. In other words, to write a will, to give away as much of their property as they can, because they can't take them. So it's very good for them to create positive potential, merit, by being generous before they die and giving away their possessions. Encourage them to forgive the people that they need to forgive, and to apologize to the people that they need to apologize to. Keep the room very peaceful. Don't have the television on. Okay. Encourage the person. If you're with somebody who's a Buddhist, remind them of their spiritual teacher, remind them to take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, have them look over their life and remember their kind deeds and rejoice in that, have them, lead them in cultivating love and compassion for other beings, remind them about bodhicitta, remind them that whatever appears to them in the dying process and in the intermediate stage and after that, that it's only appearances, so don't get too reactive to these things, but just see them as appearances. Okay, so you remind them of the Dharma in an attempt to really make their mind remember. Okay? After their breath has stopped, if you have a blessed pill, it's very helpful to crush it and mix it with a little bit of honey and put it on the crown of their head. You could do that like right before their breath stops or right afterwards. This is helpful to help their consciousness leave through the crown of their head, which is beneficial for their next rebirth. After they stop breathing, keep the room very quiet. Do some meditation in the room. Do some chanting. Don't move the body, for as long as you can. Don't move the body. And when you do have to move, then first touch the crown of the head and tell the person to be born in a Pureland or to take a precious human life. And after you've done that, then, move the body. So these are good things to do when you're with somebody who's dying. Okay, when we're dying, the thing to do is to train our own mind in these same things. Okay, remember the Dharma teachings that we've had. Take refuge, generate bodhicitta, whatever meditation practice that you are familiar with in your life, then do that practice at the time of death. Okay? And really motivate, wherever I am reborn, may I be reborn near perfectly qualified Mahayana teachers. May I have the sense to follow their advice. Yeah, may I have conducive conditions for practice, and may I practice well and make my future lives beneficial for sentient beings. Okay, make these kinds of aspirations, while you're still able to think, so that you set your intention and set your motivation for what you want to do as you're going through the death process. Okay? Then if visions appear to your mind or whatever, to remember that they're empty of inherent existence. They're only appearances, so there's nothing to get reactive about. And in that way you can keep a calm mind. If you've been doing a practice such as Chenrezig, Kuan Yin, or Manjushri, or whatever practice you've been doing, then meditate on that particular Buddhist deity and think of their qualities and imagine, being that deity yourself, because if a deity goes through a death process, they're certainly not going to be afraid and worried and clinging and grasping. Okay? So, really train your mind now by practicing now, so that at the time of death, you'll be very familiar with those meditations and it will be easy to do them then, because we're very much creatures of habit. So it's important now, while we're healthy, while our mind is still clear, to really set strong habits that we can call upon later on in our life. Okay, what is the difference between self-grasping and self-cherishing? Okay, self-cherishing, that's what I've been calling the self-centeredness. I don't tend to translate the term as self-cherishing, because some people say, well, shouldn't we cherish ourselves? And you have to say, yes, we should cherish ourselves, but we should cherish ourselves in a healthy way. And being self-centered is not cherishing ourselves in a healthy way. It's being quite selfish. Okay? And I'm explaining this, why I don't use the term self-cherishing. Because while some people may use it as synonymous with self-grasping, for people, or with synonymous with self-centeredness, for new people that term can be very confusing. So that's why I don't use it. Okay, but anyway, the difference between self-grasping and self-centeredness. Self-grasping is the view of ignorance. It's the mind that is clinging onto an inherently existent person. It's a mind that is grasping at all phenomena and all persons as existing from their own side, with their own nature, independent of everything else. That's self-grasping. The self-grasping is the root of samsara, the root of cyclic existence, and it is what we have to eliminate in order to attain liberation. Self-centeredness is a little bit different. Self-centeredness is the thought, I'm the most important one in the world. Okay? And my happiness matters the most, my suffering is the most immediate one to banish. Okay? So it's the mind that's centered on ourself, that's preoccupied with ourself. Okay? And so this self-centeredness, there's gross and subtle forms of it. In gross forms, it manifests as attachment, anger, and these kinds of things. In a subtle form, it manifests as some kind of clinging to our own nirvana, to saying, I want to be liberated from cyclic existence, and my own liberation is the most important. Okay? So when you're following the Mahayana path and you want to become a fully enlightened Buddha, you want to eliminate both self-grasping and self-centeredness. Okay? You want to overcome self-grasping, because in that way you'll be able to liberate yourself from cyclic existence and develop a lot of the capabilities that you'll need to be able to benefit others. And you want to overcome self-centeredness, because if you're able to do that, then you will have the altruistic intention for the highest enlightenment, and you will want to practice the Dharma not only for your own liberation, but in order to become a fully enlightened Buddha, so that you can help all other sentient beings attain full enlightenment as well. Okay. Okay, so somebody is asking here, and this follows what I was just talking about, is how do we be kind to ourselves? Okay, because a lot of people say that in order to be kind to others, we have to be kind to ourselves. Yeah, and in order to have compassion for others or love for others, we have to be able to have love and compassion for ourselves. And so that's very true. Okay? So like I was just saying, there are wise ways of loving ourselves, and there are confused ways in which we think we're loving ourselves, but we're not really. Okay? His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, even if you're looking out for your own happiness, okay, the best way to do that is by having compassion for others. Okay? Because our own happiness is very linked with the happiness of others. The more we can open our heart and really generate care and affection and respect for other sentient beings, then the more peaceful our own mind is going to be, the happier we're going to be. So one way to be kind to ourselves is to meditate on love and compassion for all living beings. Okay. Sometimes we think, oh, the way to be kind to myself is to go out and buy myself a present. Okay, so we go out and we spend a lot of money and get ourselves something that we want, and we think that's being kind to ourselves. But from a Buddhist perspective, that's not being kind to ourselves, because our motivation at that time is just attachment. And whenever we act out of attachment, we're putting negative karmic imprints in our own mind. Okay? So how can selfishly and with attachment buying ourselves a present be kind to ourselves? Okay? In our ignorant, confused ways of thinking, we think that's kindness, but it's not. Okay? The best way to be kind to ourselves is to let go of that grasping and that self-centeredness and turn our mind towards the welfare of all living beings. You have time for a couple more. Oh, I said a couple more. I got a handful here. Okay. Okay, so somebody just saw a cat that got hit by a car and the cat's going to die. And so what can you do? Exactly what I just said to do, you know. You can chant for the cat. Any of the chanting is good. You can take out any of the prayers that talk about the gradual path to enlightenment and that outline the major steps on the gradual path. Read that to the cat, okay? And, you know, or read it to a human being that's dying, so they get the imprint of thinking about all the different steps on the path to enlightenment. Okay, so chapter 2 talks about confessing our wrongdoing and the importance of purification. So what would you suggest is a good practice for victims of wrongdoers to heal the imploded anger, the disappointments, and so forth. Okay. Chapter 6 in Shantideva's text is on patience and how to deal with anger. My book, Working with Anger, is entirely plagiarized from Shantideva's work. Okay, I would suggest reading either of those books and then practicing those meditations, okay? And try and really work with your mind, let go of the anger, see that, leave cold water here because the hot water is too hot to drink. Thank you. Leave, sorry, got distracted there. You know, try and see the harm you received as the result of your own negative karma, and in that way stop blaming the other person. Okay? There's a very good article on my website. Some of you may have picked up the brochure about the Abbey in the back. There should be 2 website addresses in there. One of them is tuptenchodren.org. If you go on there, it's an article we just put up last week, and it's titled, the name of the article is Them, okay? And it was written by one of the inmates that I correspond with. So it's under the section on the website with the inmates writing. And this particular inmate talks about, he was very abused as a child. I mean, incredibly abused, you know, put on a burning stove and left out in the snow and humiliated, and really quite a disturbed family life. And he talks about, in this article, how he began to forgive, you know, especially in his particular case, it was his stepmother, and how he began to forgive her. And so I won't even try to put it in words, but I really refer you to that article on the website, because James described it far better than I could, you know. But what he did, basically, is he began to see that everything that happened was a result of his karma, and that the people who harmed him were suffering. And so instead of focusing on the harm he received, he began to focus on the suffering that these people were experiencing that made them harm him. Because whenever somebody harms us, it's because they're confused and they're in pain. Okay? If we can see their pain and their misery, then there's the possibility for compassion and it to arise in our heart, because we realize that that person never meant us harm. Okay? They never meant to hurt us. What was really going on was they were so overwhelmed by their own internal pain and so confused about what is the cause of happiness and what is the cause of suffering, that they thought that by doing those abusive and harmful actions, it would relieve their own pain. But they were very mistaken, and instead were in fact creating the causes of misery for themselves. Okay? So this inmate, when he began to understand this in terms of his own family, he was really able to let go and heal the anger and you know, begin this process of forgiveness and of really balancing, bringing his own mind to a peaceful state. So he, you know, he's doing quite remarkable spiritual work, even though he's locked up in a prison. Mm. So there's a lot of questions that where people are asking me, how can I help somebody else who has such and such a problem? Okay, I get asked this question a lot. You know, my brother, my sister, my friend, my mother, somebody I care about has this problem. How can I help them get over their problem? Well, it's a good question. Yeah. Sometimes we worry so much about the people that we care about that we badger them to get over their problem. We may even yell and scream at them to stop creating the causes of their suffering. We may threaten them. We may nag them. We may do all sorts of things in what we think is a compassion to give them advice, but actually they wind up not wanting to even be around us. Ever happened to you? Okay. Well, we have to really discriminate at that point when that's going on. Are we really trying to help the other person, or are we trying to control them? Because there's a big difference between helping them and controlling them. Are we trying to help them, or are we trying to get them to do what we want them to do? Okay? Even if our advice is good, even if our solution is favorable, when we want to control somebody else and we're very attached to the outcome and we want them to act in a certain way or do a certain thing, our mind at that point is overcome by attachment, and we're not going to be very skillful in how we deal with the other people. And that's why sometimes, although we think we're being compassionate and caring for them, they wind up wanting to get 100 miles away from us. Okay? Because all we do is nag and push and complain about their actions. Okay? So we have to look inside and ask ourselves, are we really being compassionate, or are we just trying to get somebody else to do what we want them to do? Okay, there's a big difference there. Yeah. So when we're trying to get somebody to do what we want them to do, then we really need to chill out a bit, okay? And recognize that getting somebody to do what we want is not necessarily solving their problem. Okay? We can give people advice, we can try and help, but they have to be free agents and make the decisions themselves. Okay? Sometimes I wonder if we get ourselves so obsessed with helping somebody else that we use it as an excuse to avoid looking at our own mind and practicing the Dharma ourselves. In other words, we're so worried about a friend or a family member that has a problem that we're just spinning around, how can I help them, how can I help them? And we're not even looking at our own mind to see if our mind is virtuous or not, to see if we're acting properly or not. Okay? So we're thinking we're being compassionate, but in actual fact, we're distracting ourselves from the practice of developing compassion. Okay? Because sometimes when there's somebody that we care a lot about who's making a mistake, yeah, we want them not to make a mistake because their mistake influences us adversely. You know what I mean? Okay? So it's actually not compassion for them. We're actually trying to prevent ourselves from having more problems. So to really be able to benefit somebody, we have to, come back and try and cultivate a good motivation ourselves. Yeah? Once we have a good motivation, then if we think, well, what can I do to help this person with whatever trip their mind is stuck in. Well, then think of how you work with your own mind when your own mind is stuck in that trip. Okay? So, if you're going to give advice to somebody, it's got to be advice that you yourself have practiced, okay, that you understand how it works, and so then you can share it with the person that you care about, not by saying to them, you should do this and this and this, but by saying, I had a similar problem one time. I was suffering because of this problem, and this is what I did to handle it. This is how I worked with my mind to handle my problem. Okay? So in order to know that, you need to do some, not only study of Buddha's teachings, but you need to do some meditation as well. Okay? Because how can you advise somebody else how to work with their mind if you don't know how to work with your mind? Okay? So much of this, it comes back to really, doing a steady practice ourselves, so that when situations arise in which we can be of benefit to others, due to our own practice, we'll instinctively know what to be able to say to the other person that will help them deal with their own mind in that situation. Okay? Because what we often are looking for is we're looking for quick fixes. Okay, what do I do? Okay, but it's not so much what do I do. First we have to balance ourselves emotionally. If we balance ourselves emotionally, then what to do becomes much clearer automatically. Okay? And so to balance ourselves emotionally, we have to have this familiarity with Dharma practice, okay, that comes from continually practicing. Yeah, making some effort on a daily basis. Okay, so we'll read the verses that we covered today. Yeah, and before we do, I just want to remind people that tomorrow night's the public talk, and then the workshop is on Saturday and Sunday. The workshop is about Tara, one female manifestation of the Buddha. And if you heard this process of purification, the four opponent powers that I described last night and tonight, then we will employ those. We will practice those over the weekend. So it's good to come, because then you'll get some first-hand experience about how to use the four opponent powers in your meditation practice. And again, I want to invite you all to come to the Abbey. Some people last night were asking me about how to do that. The best way is to go to the website, shravastiabbey.org. There's information about the programs, and then there's a way to contact our office, and then the person at the office can help you, with your trip and with plans and things like that. Okay, so let's start with verse 40. Although lying here on a bed and relying on relatives, I alone have to bear the feeling of being cut off from my vitality. For a person seized by the messengers of death, what good is a relative and what good is a friend? Time, merit alone is a protection, and I have not applied myself to it. O protectors, I, negligent and unaware of this danger, have acquired many vices out of attachment to this transient life. One completely languishes by being led away to have the limbs of one's body amputated, parched with thirst and with pitiable eyes, one sees the world differently. How much more is one overpowered by the horrifying appearances of the messengers of death, as one is consumed by the fever of terror and smeared with a mass of excrement. With distressed glances, I seek protection in the four directions. Which good person will be my protection from this great fear? Seeing the four directions devoid of protection, I return to confusion. What shall I do in that state of great fear? Right now I go for refuge to the protectors of the world, whose power is great, and to the jinas, who strive to protect the world and who eliminate every fear. Likewise, I earnestly go for refuge to the Dharma that is mastered by them and that annihilates the fear of the cycle of existence, and to the assembly of Bodhisattvas as well. Trembling with fear, I offer myself to Samantabhadra, and of my own will I offer myself to Manjughosha. Terrified, I utter a mournful cry to the protector Avalokita, whose conduct overflows with compassion, that he may protect me, one who has committed negativity. Seeking protection, I earnestly invoke noble Akashagarbha, Kashidigarbha, and all the compassionate ones. I bow to Vajri, upon the sight of whom the messengers of death and other malevolent beings flee in terror to the four directions. After neglecting your counsel, in terror I go to you for refuge. Now as I face this fear, swiftly remove my fear. Even one frightened by a fleeting illness would not disregard the physician's advice. How much more so one afflicted by the 404 diseases, of which just one can annihilate all people living in Jambudvipa, and for which a medicine is not found in any region. If I disregard the counsel of the omniscient physician who removes every pain, shame on me, extremely deluded one that I am. If I stand very attentive even on the smaller cliff, then how much more so on an extreme chasm of 1,000 leagues? It is inappropriate for me to be at ease, thinking, just today death will not arrive. The time when I will not exist is inevitable. Who can give me fearlessness? How shall I escape? I shall certainly not exist. Why is my mind at ease? What of value has remained with me from earlier experiences which have disappeared and engrossed in which I neglected the counsel of spiritual mentors? Upon forsaking my relatives and friends and this world of the living, alone I shall go elsewhere. What is the use of all my friends and enemies? In that case, only this concern is appropriate for me day and night. How shall I surely escape suffering on account of that non-virtue? Whatever vice, whatever natural misdeed, and whatever misdeed by prohibition, I, an ignorant fool, have accumulated. Terrified of suffering, all this I confess, standing with folded hands in the presence of the protectors and bowing repeatedly. May the guides be aware of my transgressions together with my iniquity. O protectors, may I not commit this evil again. Okay. Let's meditate for a few minutes and think about the teachings so we can put them into practice. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the enlightened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate
all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.